All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Stack Strength Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Daniel DeBrocke, and today we've got a special guest, Brian Carroll. So, Brian, first off, thanks for jumping on, man. It's really great to have you here. I've been a huge fan of yours for a long time. I've followed a lot of your content, and can you give a little bit of a background of yourself for maybe those who aren't familiar with you and kind of what you've been doing?
Yeah, so it's good to meet you. You and I really have never had a conversation before, so we're just starting off now. So it may be more interesting for us than it is for the listeners, but I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm going to be 42 years old this July. I'm a father of twin girls. They're three. Been married for 15 years or 13 years now, and I competed in powerlifting from 1999 to 2020. And I started off doing raw bench meets when I was in high school. Not in high school, but outside of high school in like the local competitions. We didn't have powerlifting or weightlifting in high school. The girls did, but the guys didn't. So I got started with that, kind of finished playing baseball in high school, and then put my head down and competed in powerlifting for the next 20 some years and gave it everything I had. I did play around with a little bodybuilding here and there, but powerlifting was my thing. I loved it. I was all in and gave it all I had, and stopped competing in 2020. And now I am focusing on helping as many athletes and lay people as I can with their, in particular, their low back pain. As I have a story myself with back pain starting about 12 or 13 years ago, really culminating, coming to a head in 2013 with the help of Dr. Stuart McGill. And we actually wrote a book about the process called Gift of Injury. But so now my focus is helping as many people as possible and helping them avoid my mistakes. But they do make some of the same mistakes. I work on trying to get them feeling better, because if any of you out there have had back pain, you know that the doctor is not going to be able to help you. You go to the surgeon, you spend 15 minutes with them. You go to the PT, if you're lucky, you have a good physical therapist. Unfortunately, their time is limited. They generally have a few people they're seeing at the same time, so it's not that effective. So um, I understand where you're coming from if you have back pain out there. So that's my focus these days, and just not compete anymore. So that's my way to live vicariously through my athletes.
Awesome. And I guess that kind of leads into the first thing that I did want to discuss is you have a pretty interesting background in the sense that you sustained a really serious injury, but then you came back and were able to put up some very elite totals after your back injury, and it was a really bad one for those of you guys who aren't familiar. And so I think that offers a pretty unique perspective, especially the work that you were doing with Dr. Stuart McGill and some of the other individuals you were kind of working with at that time. And so I guess one of the things that I'd like to learn a little bit more about are what some of the big turning points were for you on your road to recovery, whether it be kind of a paradigm shift for you or certain focuses or different treatment protocols, anything like that.
Yeah, well, I'd exhausted the traditional go to the doctor, get shots, go to physical therapy, surgery consultations. A couple people wanted to do surgery on me, but everyone was pretty much saying you're done powerlifting. And I didn't want to accept that. It was affecting me. Obviously, I'd been competing at that time for 15 years or so, and I still had some things that I wanted to do. So someone led me to Dr. McGill. I was reading his stuff a little bit, and back then there wasn't too many powerlifters that knew about McGill or had worked with him. I mean, since you've seen a lot of people like J.P. Price and Blaine Sumner and Steffi Cohen. These people went to see him since, but we're talking 10 years afterwards. So it wasn't a known thing to go see Dr. McGill as a powerlifter, even though we knew of him. So the paradigm shift I had was going to him and him telling me that I was in charge of reducing my pain, and the way I moved and the postures and loads and the way I trained and the way I did daily um, movements was going to determine how my back felt. And I learned that pretty quick. And I was able to wind down my pain pretty significantly within a couple of weeks to a month. So that was one big thing. And I'm able to help a lot of people with the spine hygiene, as we call it. And some movements hurt some people worse than others, and everyone's different. But seeing Dr. McGill was the first time someone had ever spent time with me. When you see a doctor, you spend 15 minutes with them. You can't get anything done during this time. So I was lucky to get with the best. I listened to his advice, and unfortunately, some people that I see, some people that Dr. McGill sees, I mean, we have a hell of a relationship. We saw 3 patients last week that were all really complicated with back injuries. A former Olympian, a 60-year-old woman, a 20-year-old kid, baseball, football, basketball star, and then someone in the middle about 40. So I've been able to work alongside him and build a good relationship. But if I wouldn't have got with Dr. McGill during that time, I don't think I would have been able to beat the split sacrum I had and the end plate fractures at L4 and L5 and the flattened discs that I had and the retrosthesis. I just had a lot of stuff going on that I had caused some of it. Some of it was from a fall. But I can tell you I wasn't getting better in the traditional sense. And Dr. McGill had to talk some sense into me and tell me, you need to back off training for a while. You got some structural issues you need to address, wind down the pain, and then maybe you get back to lifting, but I think you're done. And he told me flat out, you don't have anything left in your back. And I said, well, you think that I can get pain free? I'm going to return to lifting once again once I do that. Keep in mind, this is after about a 5-hour assessment of us spending time together, exploring the MRIs, exploring what I could do pain free, what I couldn't do pain free. And so I pushed back and said, well, when I get pain free, I'm going to return to the sport. And he goes, first things first, get pain free. Who knows? Maybe you're right. Maybe we end up writing a book about it. And then I was able to come back after about a year and a half. And I hit better numbers at 242, better bench, better squat, better deadlift, better total by a significant margin post-injury. And so I was very fortunate to be able to do that. But, some people out there, they just want to get pain-free. They don't care about getting back to lifting. And I wanted more than that. So, yeah, I know a lot of things were up against me. But if I didn't have someone like Dr. McGill in my corner, I don't think I would have been able to beat it.
I think the one thing that you've touched on quite a few times is client care. And that's something that has been really interesting to me, especially recently, because I read a paper not too long ago, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but essentially it was delving into how frequently medical professionals actually utilize the, quote unquote, evidence-based approach for client care. And it was something like 30% of the time, don't quote me on this, but it was like 30% of the time or 40% of the time they weren't offering that. And you think about that and you're like, that's wild. And then you think about I think it's the third leading cause of death in America is iatrogenic deaths, or essentially medical malpractice. Yeah. And you're like, man, our medical system, our rehabilitation system has some pretty deep flaws. And, it really is coming back down to that practitioner and that client care that they're providing you. And I mean, the difference, so I have been very lucky where I've typically had really high quality physios that I've worked with. And there was a period where I had a really bad back injury and I went to a physio that was recommended by everyone, the best sports doctor, whatever. And that was the first time that I ever went to a physio where they were treating multiple people at one time. They'd come in for 5 minutes and I'm like, what the fuck is this? What is happening? Yeah. I had never even known that was a thing before. Yeah. But now I realize that it's really prevalent. That's how most people are operating. And it's pretty wild because I had zero faith in what we were doing, mainly because I just didn't know what the fuck was going on. They'd tell me stuff and I'm like, I don't know about this, but I couldn't ask questions because they only had 2 minutes. And so it's really wild. So how do you go about when you're dealing with, let's say, an athlete or someone who's just injured? How do you bridge that gap between client care where there's just not that same one-on-one connection, I guess, or that trust?
Well, some people might know this, but I worked as a massage therapist for a while, full-time, part-time, and I still use some of my techniques that I gleaned 20 years ago. So I'm used to spending hours with someone. So that's the start right there. So you don't get a massage for 15 minutes, right? You go for 60 minutes, 80 minutes, or 90 minutes, 120 minutes or whatever. So that initially set the tone for client care for me to begin with, because if someone comes in and they're wanting their neck treated or they're wanting their quad stripped out, you can't do anything in just a couple of minutes. You need time to understand what's going on with them, where they've been, where they're going, what their goals are. Are they a ballerina or are they a power lifter? Do they need to be a gymnast and mobile everywhere? Or that's where it comes. That's where time comes in to be able to build a relationship, even if it's just walking down the hall with someone or sitting down with them for a couple of minutes and understanding where they are, where they're going, and where they want to be. Some people just want to be heard a little bit because no one's ever listened to them before. no one ever listens. Like, say they go in and see the doctor, and the doctor immediately cuts them off. Oh, I see your MRI, you're fine. You're like, hold on a second. Can I tell you what I'm feeling right now? What's been bothering me for 10 freaking years? Oh, no, your MRI. I know what's going on with you. This is what people get when they go see the doctor. It's not like, tell me what you have going on with you, young lady. How are you doing? I'm not doing well at all. My back is killing me. Where does it hurt? Does it refer down to your glute? Does it go to your foot? When does this happen? Is it all the time? They don't answer and they don't ask these questions to get an understanding where this person is. So, with my massage therapy background, of course, being trained by Dr. McGill, I spend time with people. A minimum, I won't do a consult with someone unless it's at least an hour long, and that's not even hardly hands-on. Now, if we can get through some of this stuff streamlined through a questionnaire via email, and then we can kind of jump into it a little quicker, that way I have a background, then we can start doing some testing and then talk a little bit more, and then maybe some programming, some exercise prescriptions and such. But I learned right away from Dr. McGill, and I have an interview with him that's coming out soon, actually, where I ask him to explain the McGill method and all these different things. But the reason why the McGill method is different is because you plan on spending hours with the client to understand. It isn't just using the bird dog and side plank and curl up. It isn't just using, avoiding flexion or extension, because some people, that doesn't bother them. So we don't avoid that. It's not everyone needs to do spine hygiene. Not everyone needs to stiffen their core with the big three. McGill Big Three is about assessment, giving someone a diagnosis and a prognosis, and then working to build the deficits and get them out of pain, return them to sport or return them back to life. There is no, we never do reverse hypers, or we never do stretching. We never do this. No, it's all about what's going on. Sometimes the person has very little mechanical pain, but they have a bunch of hang-ups with their movement and stuff. We got to work with them on their movement a bit to free them up. So it isn't just about a one-size-fits-all package. You tailor it to the client and their needs, and everyone's so unique.
It's funny because, especially with the emergence of the biopsychosocial model and how that's become a lot more, widely accepted among clinicians.
Yeah.
There was a period there where I was hearing a lot of people kind of shitting on McGill's Big Three and a lot of the stuff that he was saying, and being like, oh, it's overly reductionist, it's too mechanistic, it's more complicated than that. And it's like, I'm looking at that and I'm like, okay, I understand what you're saying, in terms of, hey, we probably shouldn't try and reduce it down to like a single thing, because that's not always the case. But at the same time, it's like, man, he's helped a lot of people. And I don't know how you could rectify that. You know what I mean? Like, how I don't think that's by chance. I don't think that that's explained by just, oh, they just felt like they were getting treatment and therefore they were getting better. It's like, I don't buy it,
Yeah.
Especially for athletes like yourself, right? Who have to perform at a very high level. Like, I don't know. I don't buy it. So, like, I understand the biopsychosocial model, big advocate of it, but at the same time, I think there's a little bit of a push too far in that direction, and a little bit of a, kind of a departure from some of the very basic mechanistic stuff that we actually do know. Maybe it's a little unclear what those relationships are at times, but I definitely think that there's something there, and it's probably a bit naive to, or maybe not naive, but I don't know what the word is, maybe risky to abandon it altogether.
Fantastic to just throw it all out.
Yeah, exactly.
I've heard the same things, and everyone at some point gets really, made fun of or like called an idiot and all this stuff. But you're right. There's an overcorrection for a bit where people are like, no, your back's fine. Yeah, some people's back is fine, and they just have a little bit of pain or used to have pain or whatever, and they're struggling mentally. I get all that, but just saying, oh, you're fine. MRIs don't mean anything. Pain mechanisms and generators don't mean anything. Is your point, not just the power lifters, but the people that have to sign NDAs that I work with and that we know Stu has worked with. We're talking NBA, UFC, NFL, MLB. Like, the who's who of athletes go to him for their back, not someone that wants to give them a shrink session. They go to the expert for their back, but he can't talk about it. He has no reason to, doesn't want to, nor could if he wanted to. So, and I can't either when I talk with people. But here's the key to it. McGill doesn't see people that this worked for, that the psychosocial model worked for. or for the stretching model work for, the chiropractic or the massage or the traditional PT, we see people that all that has failed. They've been told the pain's all in their head and they're about ready to blow their head off because they think they're crazy and they don't deserve to live. And then there's the other people that are said, you can never move again. Don't ever move. You're done lifting and all this stuff. So we see the people that fall through the cracks and these traditional methods or newer methods don't work for. And that's why we have a holistic approach of identifying the cause of pain, removing it, building pain-free capacity, doing a long assessment, thorough assessment, and then you come up with a plan. So yeah, some people can get better with that type of model, right? Some people can get better somehow because of their superior genetics, or they don't have too bad of a back injury, so a little stretching, a little rest, they're as good as new. But I don't see people with that. I see people that have seen 10 practitioners and they've tried everything that we've talked about and it doesn't work for them. So then we start and we start fresh with removing the cause of pain. So that stuff can work, but I stay super busy that I can't even keep up with it because of the overflow of people that fell from those approaches.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so I was reading actually one of your articles on your website, just kind of as I was doing like some research and refreshing some of the content that you put out there. I was reading an article that you talked about kind of bulletproofing your back and whether or not in order to do that you need to develop more absolute strength or strength endurance of the musculature and the trunk musculature. And I thought that was a fairly interesting thing, and I don't think that necessarily it's something that's discussed probably as often as it should, because you always hear like what it was the expression like weak things break, therefore you need to be really strong,
Right.
and it's like that's super important obviously, but then also there's like an endurance factor there as well, right? Especially if you're doing lots of heavy training, building into a big meet or something like that. So I was wondering if you could kind of discuss that in a little bit more depth. And then also potentially touch on how you might implement that from like a programming standpoint and how those variables might change depending on where you are in your competitive season. Obviously, you can't be super specific, but just kind of a big picture, principled perspective on it.
Yeah. Um, so it's about spine endurance, muscular endurance, like protecting the back. So if you look at the studies for people that generally hurt their back, it's due to fatigue and then a breakdown in form, whether they're loading boxes at work or they're picking up something around the house or they're lifting weights. It's usually due to a lack of stiffness or a lack of endurance, and then the muscles buckle and you end up having the injury. So we approach the training by building stiffness with static exercises and not the bending over and over exercise that you see bodybuilders do or whatever. And that has its reasons too. But we want to be able to build muscular endurance in the positions that we're going to need to be in for a squat or for a deadlift or something like that. But for someone a little different, they might want to approach it a little bit differently for their different sport. But for powerlifting and strength training specific, having the locked in building super stiffness under load is what's worked great for me. Not just rebuilding my back, but being able to make my core super endurable and being able to keep it locked in under time without any buckles or micro movements. And it's been able to help dozens and dozens of people get out of pain or avoid pain and take their training up to the next level. Now, I'm not saying that if you bend your back and do cable crunches or reverse hypers or hyperextensions, your back's going to break and it's going to be weak. There's a lot of different factors that go into this, namely the type of collagen you have in your disc, the shape of your disc, how lucky you are and how much you're bending and flexing, how big you are. There's different things that go into that. So there's plenty of people out there that can bend and flex and still build an endurable core. But we do know that eventually some people will stress their annuluses and start to build disc bulges from bending and flexing under load with compression. Um, that gets some people, not everyone, but it gets some people. So the way I build a core, if I'm training a power lifter, I like to do suitcase carries where you create a little bit more compression on the spine by holding a kettlebell in one hand, then maybe go to bottoms up Bottoms up carry works the grip a little bit more. Any micro movements in the core, it's going to want to move the kettlebell a bit. Um, Stir the pot and their variants. Planking on a Swiss ball, doing small circles, going north, south, east, west. Of course, the big three. But a note on the big three is most people that do the big three, even like pro athletes that I see, or even like good power lifters that seemingly have a strong and rigid core, they don't do for instance, the bird dog right. They don't hold it for 10 seconds. And it's not like it's this glamorous, super hard exercise, but most people struggle to do it right. And then I tune them up a little bit and they say, oh, now I feel like I'm actually getting something out of it. I'm getting a more posterior chain core stability. And then you go to the side plank, you lock that in properly. You get the lateral, and then you do the curl up or a dead bug moderated variant. You get the interior core a little bit too. But I like to do any type of static. Good mornings can be good too. The What happened there? Something.
It just cut out a little bit, but I heard everything. You're
Okay.
good.
Um, but I like to use static, um, stiffening exercises that won't soften up the disc for someone who's trying to be brutally strong, and that will build as much stiffness, not just in the back muscles, but in the disc, so it can bear load better. And that's the way I like to train it, man. Before and after training, a warm up with maybe some suitcase carries, a couple like big three. You do your normal workout, whether it be a squat, deadlift, or bench day, and then maybe some stir the pot, maybe a couple bottoms up carries, maybe some sled drags, maybe something like that. But there's really all kinds of different variations and ways to make the exercises harder. But that's the things that I like to use to build the core.
Mm-hmm.
And bulletproof the back.
So you mentioned,
And
sorry, what was the last
bulletproof the back,
one?
but there is no true bulletproof in anything. If you lift heavy enough and you have some kind of movement under load, things will blow apart. But you lessen your chances to move under load by building that stiff, endurable stiffness. Is the word I'm looking for. Endurable stiffness under load.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, do you find it all that, because I know in your article you mentioned doing it before as well as potentially after, so like as part of your prep work, part of your cool down, do you find that if you do it before, that fatigues an individual, and so it hampers their ability to actually maintain rigidity during the lift? Or like you're just talking about going like fairly light or kind of progressing into something?
Well, if the lifter is getting fatigued just by doing a couple core exercises, then he probably shouldn't be under the bar. But with that caveat, yeah, if I beat someone down with a bunch of McGill Big Three and they're fatigued, that's not going to serve them right. So just be a little bit. So we won't give them a heavy dose before. I might have them just do a couple per. 3 bird dogs, 10 seconds, side plank, curl up, and then maybe build it up over time. So it's going to be the right dose for the right person, of course. So yeah, to your point, you do
Mm-hmm.
too much core, then you are exhausted, you're tired, and then when you're fatigued, you're more likely to buckle and move under load, which isn't good anyway. So a little bit can prime it, right? You stiffen the core a little bit, which will help unleash the distal athleticism and the ball and socket shoulder and the hips. So that can be good, but too much of anything can be a poison as well. So I like the priming it at the beginning of the workout, and then at the end, if you got a long car drive and you have some achy back sometimes, it might not be a bad idea to find a little bit of a hack before you get into the car after a squat and deadlift session and drive home an hour. But everyone's different. The stiffening might be
Mm-hmm.
bad for them at that point, or it might be good. Everyone's unique.
Yeah, I only mention that because I know a lot of people, especially if they're like, "Oh fuck, I should try this," tend to just jump right into it and like hammer it out and treat it like it's its own training
Yeah,
session. I know I definitely used to do that for sure when I had like weak points. I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna hammer the shit out of my external rotation on my shoulder," and then I get to the bench press, and my shoulders are just completely fried, and so my bench is garbage, and the technique looks like shit. So, um, yeah. So, I also really liked the article or kind of discussion that you had around um, accessory work. So how to identify accessory work for your weak points, how to implement it, how to scale it. I thought you had some really great recommendations on that, and I was wondering if you could go through how you might assess a lifter for some of those weak points, and then looking at implementation from, because I think, it's like, are you going to use, let's say, a good morning? So I think one of the exercises that you mentioned for deadlift was a pin good morning, so, or like a dead good morning or something like that. So you're going from that start position, but then that compared to, let's say, like a dumbbell RDL or a 45-degree back raise, like the rates of fatigue are going to be very different. And so how do you go about prescribing exercises to address weak points, and then also just kind of talking about the whole, making the most of your accessory work or whatever?
Yeah. So I, over time of coaching people, I kind of found the algorithms of what worked for people. I assess the lift, obviously. That's what I start with, and I see where they fail. I see where their strong points are. We make sure that the core is shored up. But then I also look at what are the demands of what they're doing. So if we're talking about powerlifting, we obviously know what those are. Very unidimensional, pretty much. And then what are they weak at? What are their strong points? And I'll tailor their assistance work to attack their weak points and not focus so much on their strong points. And but then you also got to consider where are they in training? Are they close to a meet? Are they far off in an off season? What is their injury history? So some things aren't going to be good for someone that let's say someone's just got kind of a back that goes out every once in a while and flares up on them. Well, maybe we don't do the chain suspended the good mornings. We might go to something with a lot less compression, like the one leg RDLs or something like that, depending on what their weak points are and such. But the amount of compression varies between exercise to exercise so much that you got to keep that in mind too, in particular with the back. But over the years, finding exercises that work for people. Someone misses at the top, which I used to sometimes on the squat. That was generally a quad issue driving all the way through. My quads would kind of die on me, then I kind of just fold forward. So then I'd have a little more quad centric focus for those people or myself. Maybe like half leg presses, things like hack squats, piston squats, keeping the pressure on the quads. Of course, maybe reverse sled drags and different things like that. But one common theme that I see for squat and the deadlift is people just don't have that core endurance because they don't train it. They don't build a lot of core endurance doing the Russian twists, the flexing, the sit-ups, the leg raises, the reverse hypers. They don't build a ton of endurance with that because it's a different type of stiffness than flexing and bending it over and over. So getting them to do some planks, getting them to do some stir the pot, some kind of suitcase carry. Now, strongmen that carry the yoke and everything, that's different. They generally don't have core deficits like that, right? Because they got to do the yoke and do farmers carries. But a lot of powerlifters don't train their core, and it's really crazy. And I see it like I'll have some of these guys that can really lift some weight, and they come here and they can't even hardly do a bird dog. And I'm thinking, man, if you could just stir up your core a little bit more, you'd be so much more efficient in your lifting. So, I wrote the book almost 10 years ago now, 10-20 Life, and that's where a lot of my philosophy came from the book, 10-20 Life. And I have an entire weak point index where I say, okay, well, try these exercises. If you miss on the bottom of the squat, the middle of the squat, the top. Same thing with the bench, bottom, middle, top. Same thing for the deadlift, bottom, middle, top. And a couple things on the checklist is, number one, make sure your form is good and it's tailored for your physique, your goals, and your specific build, not physique. That's the first thing. And then your core. Those two things right there can take care of a lot of things. Your positioning, and then your core endurance for people with bad form or lifting form or weak points. In between grip and core, I think we cover a lot of it, with people's weak points. But then, if some people like have a quad deficit, or they can sling it off their chest in the bench press and they can't grind it in a lockout. So then you can work some range of motion like pen presses and such. But I like to start with the most low-hanging fruit and just kind of go up the escalate as necessary and go up the ladder depending on who the person is and if the problem's getting taken care of or not. But, man, a lot of the time it comes down to you can only suggest things for people. And a lot of the time people don't want to do it, or they'll kind of make it their own and may bastardize it or make it better. Who knows? But at the end of the day, you got to experiment, and the lifter or the person you're coaching has to be willing to be honest with you and truly try what you're trying to get them to do. Otherwise, the relationship won't work, and your best weak point suggestions won't work for them either.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky because I noticed that for myself in the past, for sure, and also for a handful of clients that I've coached, when they have some sort of issue, and let's say we identify that it's, the pain in their shoulders due to shitty internal external rotation capacity of the shoulder. And so we get them to do certain drills and exercises, and then all of a sudden they free it up. They've got better stability. They've got better, positioning at end range and all that jazz. And they just kind of slow down on it. And it's very difficult. Like, if this is someone's threshold where if they go past it, that's where they start experiencing pain, they'll kind of build up to about here. But they never really create a buffer. And that's really tricky because when someone's in pain, man, they're motivated. But when the moment you get out of pain, you forget it ever happened. Like, you completely just forget. And it's very difficult at times to get people to stay disciplined with those activities that are like, hey, this is fucking important. Like, this is going to keep you healthy. This is going to keep you progressing. Because, I mean, I was chatting with, I think it was Dave Tate, when I was on the podcast a while back, and he was talking about like momentum and how he's like, momentum is one of the most important things, and it's also one of the hardest things to develop. I'm pretty sure it's it. Maybe I'm just making that up. I don't know. But I definitely agree. And one of the issues is like little fucking injuries. Oh, my elbow's beat up, so I can't push as hard on the bench, or oh, my back or my hip or my knee. And it's like, it's so difficult to get people to consistently, put deposits into that bank, so to speak. So
Exactly.
one of the things that I was wondering is
exactly with clients, they get out of pain and they think they're home free, and they just revert back to everything that they were doing that caused their pain and injury in the first place, and they backslide. They have a relapse. Man, I'm so mad. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I got lazy. Well, they can get out of pain again, but they seem like they kind of keep learning the lesson instead of staying disciplined and building more capacity instead of just having, you have one bad day and you're back in pain. That's not a way to live. You got to take your time, and people want to rush that too. Either they revert back to the things that hurt them, or they rush back into lifting. I'm going to turn into a pumpkin if I don't weight train heavy for 2 months. They're freaking out. Meanwhile, if they understood and would like talk to people that knew what they were talking about or do research, they'd know that, yeah, you might atrophy a little bit of muscle, but if you're on a little bit of drugs, you're eating good, your muscles aren't going to all go away, dude. I don't even lift weights anymore, hardly. I haven't lifted weights really in the last 2.5 years. The heaviest I go is like 200 pounds on the bench, 300 or 400 pounds on the squat and deadlift, and I'm still carrying a lot of muscle at 280, taking HRT and kind of eating reasonably what I want. Your muscles aren't just going to go away if you don't train for a couple months. Will you flatten out, lose some glycogen, all that? Yes, you will. But it'll come back like that. And people are like, oh, I'm going to, lose everything. If you're that worried about losing everything, then you weren't that good to begin with. Or if you're worried, you're not that good anyway, so you shouldn't be worried. That's the way I look at it. Like, either way, you're going to you got to take some time off, heal, stop doing the things that hurt you all the time, be compliant, and then, build more of a buffer, a threshold, in your words. I like that. People have built this much capacity, and they're like, oh, I got to get back to lifting, and I'm ready. And then they, oh, I tweaked myself. What happened, Brian? I can't believe this happened. And then we do the shit over and over and over, and I'm like, when are you going to learn? But then other people are professionals, and they follow it to the T, and then boom, man, they just keep checking things off. They have a little bit of a setback. You know what? I'm going to learn from this. And being professional and working with professionals that's a good time. Not every one of our clients are going to be like that.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because a lot of the times when you actually take that more slow and gradual approach, it seems slower, it seems more gradual, but after the first, let's say, couple of weeks, the rate of growth is exponential. Whereas the other guy who kind of pushed beyond his capacity a little too early, and then he kind of got to come back. So it's more like this kind of up and down. And one of the things actually that I see fairly commonly is when people are being diligent with their
Yeah,
rehab, but they're trying to treat it like training, where it's like, maybe I'm going to get a client to do some dumbbell flies or something like that because it's like, hey, we need to get you just more mobile
yeah,
in your shoulders, right? So I'm like, focus on high reps, just, get the movement in, try and push your range of motion, don't push the pain or anything
yeah.
like that. And then they just start fucking pushing, and it's like, dude, that's not what this exercise is for. And then they hurt themselves, and they're like, oh, see, it wasn't this. And I'm like, dude, that's like using a steak knife, and then you jam yourself in the hand and saying that knives are bad and shouldn't be used to eat food or steak or something like that. It's like, it doesn't make any sense.
No, and it's about the application or whatever it is that you're telling them. And unfortunately, some people we just can't help. Those are like some of the people you can't help. You'll tell them to
Mm-hmm.
do 5, and they'll do 10. Then you'll say, "Hey, you're doing too much," and they'll keep doing it. Um, you know, you mentioned the up and down, right? Instead of the even keeled person. What are you building when you're even keeled? You're building positive momentum going forward. You don't have a setback every week, which will start exactly like the psychosocial model. It'll start messing with your head. If you're having a flare up every time you move because you keep picking the scab and you don't think about how you're moving and you're not cognizant about it, yeah, it's going to make you crazy. And yes, you're going to sensitize yourself mentally and physically to the pain. I agree with that, but at the same time, people have to take ownership for when they really want to get better. They got to take ownership and say, you know what, yeah, I messed up, and I was doing dumbbell flies too hard. It's my fault. It's not Daniel's fault. He tried to tell me to go at like 40%, and I'm going at 140%. It isn't the exercise; it's the dosage and the execution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something actually that I'd love you to touch on as well is kind of the dose response relationship to maybe certain flexion based movements, like let's say a Jefferson curl or maybe a deficit stiff leg deadlift, where we don't have, there's not an egregious amount of spinal flexion, but let's say there's some spinal flexion coming in the thoracic versus the low back. And if you could kind of differentiate between those degrees, I guess.
Well, we know that some people do fine with flexing their back, and other people don't. So, are we talking specifically about power lifters, or just flexing in general, or what are we talking about?
You know what? Just do whatever you want. Powerlifters, and then just kind of go off on a tangent.
Okay, and then restate the question for me, just so I can have it clear.
Yeah, so talking about the degrees of freedom, I guess, that you
Got
can
it.
have in terms of spinal flexion, and then also where the flexion's occurring, if it's segmental or more global and evenly distributed, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, when we're talking about, let's start with training. Some people can move their back just fine. Some people start with like a flexion moment, and then they keep it locked in there, kind of like you've seen with I don't know who kind of pulls like that. KK used to pull like that,
Like KK. Yeah.
and yeah, he put a lot of torque on his back and compression and such. But the worst is the movement under load, according to the science. It's the movement under the heavy compression and load. But the moment isn't quite as bad. Some people have flexion moments all the time, and they're fine. Um, some people, they can flex their back like crazy, and they're good for a long time. Other people have just a little bit of a micro movement, and they blow a disc apart. So I see a lot more people successfully with thoracic flexion than people with a really kinked up spine in the lumbar that you see like on the. How old are you? Okay,
34.
do you remember that guy Diesel Weasel or whatever his name was that was always pulling with the super rounded back or whatever his name was? He would always post videos like trying to blow his back apart, and his back every time would be completely rounded over. And anyway, he was when the forums were new, he was always posting his videos for people to critique him, and he looked like he was trying to kill his lower back. So anyway, my point is, some people, their back is bulletproof. Like that one guy deadlift. Who is the guy on Instagram now that pulls from those six like 3 feet negative deadlift from a deficit? Have you seen that? There's a
No.
guy on there's a guy on Instagram now that pulls from a deficit that's like over 2 feet, and he has to reach all the way down with his arms are past his toes to grab the bar, and he stiff legs it and all this stuff. Some people are touched by the hand of God, and they can flex. Other people can't do so much. Now, for rehab, some people can, let's say they're flexion intolerant. Any type of flexion really causes them a lot of pain. Those are the people that shouldn't be deadlifting with that type of back. Okay? Now, the people that it doesn't hurt them and they can do a bunch of like extension, cranking their back on their facet joints, they're fine, or flexing forward and they're fine on the deadlift, then I don't think that's bad for them. But until that start causes pain, so be it. If they pull the best that way, they can do that, but they might pay for that a little bit later. So for the rehab aspect of it, if they're having pain, deadlifting with that type of form, or those movements cause them pain, some people have a lot of people actually have the mindset of progressive overload. Maybe you remove flexion for a little bit and then you start slowly adapting to flexion again. The only problem that I see with that and experiences with clients that come to me is the loaded people have problems with that. Now, the everyday person that just wants to be able to flex forward a little bit, that aren't trying to load their spine, those people do pretty good with that sometimes. Now, the people that are lifting again, that are trying to get back to flexion under load, those people don't typically do that good. Now, going back to a point that I made earlier, I don't see these people that recover from microdosing their flexion, extension, and rotation versus the way that we have the remove the cause, let it desensitize, then slowly get back to jiu-jitsu or wrestling or football or powerlifting or strongman. That's the way we approach it. So when people come to me, they've already tried the microdosing, the flexion, or doing the McKenzie press-ups and extension. This stuff made them worse or it didn't work for them. Now, there are people that it works for them, but I never see them because they've gotten fixed. I see the people this all fails for. So generally, their rehab will be focused on the things they can do well that don't cause them pain. And depending on what their end goal is, if they're a real flexible athlete or a stiffened one like a powerlifter, I'll tailor their program to, to meet the demands of their sport. But then you have some people in the middle, like a UFC fighter or like a Green Beret or a SEAL. So I've had people that have blew their back out doing the sit-up time test. And that's a really tough one on a bigger guy that has a bigger spine. That's a lot of stress on the disc after running with a rucksack and then doing 60, 70 sit-ups in 1 minute. So sometimes they need to get a surgery. Sometimes I can fix them, but they still have to face that sit-up test. So what we do is we train them statically to build endurance, whether it be planks, stir the pot. We'll have them do some sit-ups at like 30, 40, 50%. So they might do sets of 20 or something instead of sets of 70. And then we'll just make sure that their psoas and their hip flexors are ready for it. And they won't do more than 20 sit-ups at one time, then bust out 75 because their core is so endurable and strong, and then they don't have to worry about the test again. So there's all kinds of different ways where we have to do a little bit of flexion and extension form to get ready for their test, but we don't train them that way and beat them to death with these things that end up being their poison. But for someone else, they can flex, extend, rotate their back forever. That's great. They're not a back patient of mine. They're not a back client. So each person's unique, but if flexing their back hurts them, we stay away from that for a while. And then depending on what their sport is, their demands are, once it's healed and not so sensitized, they can go back to flexing their back. How long is that? Everyone's different.
Yeah, I like how you provided a lot of context around that as well, because I think that's something that is a bit difficult. When you hear opposing viewpoints and you're like, they both make really, really good points, but they're not mutually exclusive. Like you said, it's like some people have, basically an unlimited tolerance to flexion and they'll never get injured and they're just, blessed. Other people are fine until they're not. And, then they just blow their back out lifting a fucking water bottle.
Exactly. I see the people that blew their back out petting their dog and they're crying on the couch crippled and they have a disc bulge that's gigantic on the MRI, and that's when it seemingly happened. But, I'm a McGill practitioner. I don't walk around, trying to do flexion all the time because that was one of my pain generators. But, dude, flexion is fine for me. It doesn't cause me pain. My back's not exploding. All right? But I am a bigger guy. Mm-hmm. And if I want to start poking and prodding on those discs. Maybe if I did it enough, it would sensitize me again. But if I have a flexion moment or moving flexion sometimes, it's not the end of the world. But for some people, they would argue with you and say, absolutely, flexion kills me. I don't ever want to, flex my back again. Well, you're going to need to flex your back again at some point, but I understand that's your pain generator, so you want to stay away from it for a bit. But man, everyone's unique with their mechanisms, so there is no one size fits all program. And I think coming full circle to why the doctor and physical therapist and everyone else fails is they have a cookie cutter. When they do spend time with you, it's a cookie cutter program. McKinsey press ups. Well, McKinsey press ups for someone that has a disc bulge and they have 80% of their disc height that hasn't gotten smaller or degenerated a little bit. Those people, as long as they have the facet space, they can pull some of their disc material back in sometimes. But the person that isn't as blessed as them, they can end up ruining their facet joints for a couple of years doing all the press ups every day. So for someone that is flexion intolerant, that extension feels good, press ups can help. But if you do them too much, they can end up causing a backlash. So what we advocate is somewhere in the middle. Maybe here on your stomach instead of all the way up into your maybe one fist or two fists. So you still get a little bit of shrinking the disc bulge, but without the bad stuff. So we do stretching, we do McKinsey stuff, we do all kinds of arts. And some people do adjustments with the McGill method, but it's about using the correct tool for the problem that you have at hand and not just having a dogma like, oh yeah, you have a disc bulge, you do this, this, and this. The big three in walking, you're going to be fine. Well, it's not the way it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I remember I had a pretty bad back injury several years back where I was like literally in a back brace and on crutches for like 11
wow.
months.
You have a fall?
And yeah, no, it was, I picked up a water
Oh,
balloon.
really? Oh, so
And everything just fucking blew
wow.
out. Like, it was very likely that I just kind of exceeded tissue tolerance prior to that, and then that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. But it was like real bad. Like I had multiple ruptured discs. I had like nerve damage for my sciatic nerve and like SI joint issues. Like it was real bad. And they were like, okay, don't walk too long, don't stand up for too long, don't sit down for too long, don't lay down for too long. You can't have sex. You can't do. And I was just like, okay, so literally just don't do anything. But also don't do nothing.
Right. Yeah. So.
And I went to the physio, and that was the time where I went to the physio. And I like normally I've always been like, you know what, I can kind of fix myself. Yeah. But that time I was legitimately scared because it was so bad, and I really was scared that I wasn't going to be able to do anything again. And so I went to a physio. This was like the best person, and same thing. That's when I initially was introduced to that like 15-minute exposure. And they were getting me to like stand on one leg on a Bosu ball and do all this stuff. And I was like, guys, I just don't think that this is helping. Like, I can squat over 600. This is like years ago. And I was like, I can squat over 600. Like standing on a Bosu ball is not enough of a stimulus for me. Like I don't feel anything happening, and it's, I'm not getting any better. But I gave that a shot for that full 10 months. And then at one point I was like, fuck this. I'm done with you guys, or I think it was like maybe after like 7 months, I was like, yeah, I'm done with you guys. And then I just went on my own back to lifting, and I did exactly that. Like I wasn't going into extension because they were getting me to do that a bunch, but it kept fucking hurting. And so I just went back, grabbed an empty barbell, and started deadlifting. And then started doing like paused reps and really slow reps, but like a lot of rigidity work, like you were saying. And that for me was a huge, huge thing. So
it's very discouraging for people. Man, they're pretty broken because they think there's a chance that they'll reach out to me and get the same thing. The same like cookie cutter program or the same thing they've tried. And almost every time I get the client or potential client to send me what they're doing, I don't know if I've ever had one that was on target. A program sent that was on target. Like, oh, that's pretty freaking good. I wouldn't. Maybe it's not exactly how I would do it, or McGill would do it, or whatever. That's just my bias, right? But none of they have people like picking their scab, doing McKinsey press ups, stretching their back where they have an acute disc bulge to like, whatever, damage their disc more. I don't know what their purpose is when they're getting them to stretch as far as they can. And some of these people, dude, they're in bad shape, man, because they're not getting any care from their primary care, from their surgeon, from their physical therapist, from their pain management. It's so disjointed that no one's communicating. It's like it wouldn't be unheard of where people get a surgery here in the States, and sometimes they don't get a call back for their physio schedules. And so I've seen people that literally never got a call back and never rehabbed their back. They didn't do shit. And then they saw a YouTube
Mm-hmm.
video where they say, okay, to fix your back, put your feet out as wide as you can and reach as far as you can first thing in the morning every day for 10 minutes. And what do you think happened to that person? She's had 2 more back surgeries. It's just, it's terrible, man. Some of the care that people get. So I'm glad that you're able to come out the other side and use the common sense and the training strategy you have to not do the things that hurt you and slowly build back because the system's broken, man. And there's a lot of good physical therapists out there and physios, but most of them work on their own. If you haven't noticed, they do their own practice. They don't have the model. So you asked me earlier, how am I differentiating myself? I'll see a couple people a day, and that'll be it. So I can focus every bit of
Mm-hmm.
my brain on this person, everything that's going on with them, anything that can help to get them better, and anything they may be missing. And that's how I try to make the biggest difference there. But dude, there's no slowdown of people coming into the sport of powerlifting or strongman or whatever. Like it's grown so much in the last few years. Also, there's never going to be a slowdown of people hurting themselves because they're new. I just pulled 315, bro. I've been deadlifting for my second time deadlifting, and you see the form they're using. And it's like you're probably gonna hurt yourself soon. And these people that are weekend warriors for CrossFit, they blow their back and knee and hip out all the time. So all you can do is kind of try to tell people and give your best to fix them when they get hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point about the clinician communication as well. Because like, I'll have athletes where maybe I'm doing their nutrition and someone else is doing their programming, or maybe I have to communicate with like a psychologist because maybe they have like an eating disorder, so I'm working in collaboration
Right.
with them, or something along those lines. In my entire like, I've been a coach for about 11 years now, so not like an insanely long time, but a decent amount of
Yeah.
time. In that entire time, I've had one person respond to an email, call, text, whatever. And it's not like I only do it once. It's like every single check-in that I do for them, which is on a weekly
Right.
basis, I am tagging their email so they get an email notification of what I responded to. They'll get the video that I sent, so they're 100% on the same page. I have had one person respond, and it was one time, and that was it. It's so atrocious, like the amount of communication or collaboration that goes on between coaches, clinicians, whatever. It's insane, and it takes like not a lot of effort, to be honest. And it's like that's what your client's paying you to do. So I don't know why people are so bad about it.
Well, it's only going to help you as well. Like it's gonna help.
Yeah, yeah,
You're
exactly.
passing on information, so it's only going to help them make better and easier decisions. If you want to use the word easy, it'll make it easier for them and better for them. And so it's a win-win-win for everybody. But I don't know, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting time with medicine in general, and people getting into the sport of powerlifting and strength sports because they watch a tutorial on YouTube and they're ready to go lift heavy or go jump in a powerlifting meet. Man, so many people are getting really, really hurt. And a lot of them really regret it. They're like, dude, if I'd have known it would hurt me this much and affect me mentally this much, I'll never deadlift again. I don't care if my back is fixed next week, I'll never do it again. And they don't get the care,
Mm-hmm.
man, and they get really overlooked, unfortunately. But that's why we're trying to make a difference out there. And you can't fix everyone, and unfortunately, man, some people need surgery. Some people's back is never going to get like all the way better until like they're in their 60s potentially. But most people can get significantly better, and that's why I like doing what I'm doing. Like I can, most people I can
Mm-hmm.
get significantly better, but you can't guarantee anyone an outcome, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so we're almost coming up on that hour mark, and I was wondering what sort of insights or things that you'd want to share maybe with the audience that maybe we didn't cover.
Um, well, I don't think you should panic if you have a back injury. I mean, anyone that's lifting heavy weight, most people in general will have some back pain at one time or another. But don't don't avoid it. Don't run from it. Address it. And a lot of the time, it's your daily movement patterns that can help give you more capacity for training, so you can get away with breaking form a little bit. You can train a little bit longer. Um, so a disc bulge or something like that isn't a death sentence for you, but you should manage it. You can lift again, but you need to be strategic about it. If you are a power lifter or a strength athlete, yeah, you can do some of the bendy, twisty things, but I recommend doing front planks and side planks and heavy carries and yoke walks and sled drags and things like that. That's going to help you build core endurance, and it's going to help you lift more weight. So go after the low hanging fruit, especially if you're new to the sport. Stir up your form, build your core, study, learn a lot, compete, give everything your all. Don't half-ass things. And then from there, then worry about, the special supplements and the newest trends and the newest knee wrap and all that stuff. But there's a lot of low-hanging fruit with just your core and your grip and your form on the squat, bench, and deadlift that people you could exhaust yourself for over 10 years just really maximizing those things. And people go after the
Mm-hmm.
things that are just a gimmick or a flashy new thing at the time. So stay away from the flashy new things. It will be another piece of wisdom that I could hand off to people. And when you're seeking out an expert, yeah, of course, their following or social media following does, bear some kind of meaning. But at the same time, if people are really good marketers, then they're probably not that good of a clinician or coach or lifter themselves. So beware of the really good marketers out there, because that means they're not too busy doing.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. Awesome, man. So where can people find you, and are you working on any projects right now that maybe you wanted to promote and kind of tell people about?
I'm working on getting my YouTube a little bit more steady. So Brian Carroll 1306 is the YouTube. And you can find my stuff at powerrackstrength.com. That's my hub, where I have my book that I co-authored with Stu McGill, Gift of Injury. It documents the process of getting my back fixed and use the tenets of back mechanic. In my book, 1020 Life, it's a strength training book, kind of powerlifting centered. Raw training is what it is. It doesn't really mention equipment. So that's my training philosophy. And I wrote that book about 10 years ago. You can find that at powerrackstrength.com. And my social media is Brian Carroll 1306. But no projects I'm working on now other than really honing in my skills as a clinician and coach, and helping as many people as possible with their back pain, regardless of their injury or their endeavor. I like working with a lot of average Joes. I work with a lot of top tier athletes, but each one is unique and interesting to me. So I want to thank you for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it. And I've enjoyed talking with you. And back pain's not a death sentence. You can get better. And you know, seek out the best in their field and get them to help you, whether it's a shoulder injury or powerlifting coaching or dieting. Seek out the best and, absorb the advice, and, be careful with pushing back, especially if you're paying someone for their advice. Listen to them, give it at least a try.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Awesome, man. So thank you so much for jumping on. It's definitely been awesome chatting with you. I got a lot of notes here as well that of kind of little strings of thought that I'm going to kind of pursue after this. So appreciate you jumping on. Appreciate you sharing all that great information. Make sure you guys give him a follow. All that stuff's going to be linked up in the show notes. Check out the website. Check out his Instagram. Go support his YouTube. Brian puts out a lot of content on a regular basis, and there's tons and tons of great stuff out there that he's been doing, including his books that he's written, especially The Gift of Pain. Was a fantastic book, so I'd highly recommend checking that out. And like I said, you can get that on his website as well. So Brian, thanks so much for jumping on, man. It was a great chat.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.